What if I told you you can be whoever you want to be? That's correct. You can be whoever you want to be. There are no set rules or laws that govern your identity, because our identities, the very essence of who we are not set in stone. They're crafted from the myriad of experiences, interactions, and cultural influences we absorb throughout our lives. But what happens when these elements change? How does our identity shift and evolve in response? Welcome to Life Unscripted, where we delve deep into the fluid nature of identity and the roles we play in life. I'm Stafford, your host and guide on this journey into understanding how our identities shape and are shaped by the world around us. In today's episode, we're exploring the construct of identity, how it forms, changes, and impacts every facet of our lives. So why is it important to understand the dynamics of identity? I mean, we're always asked for our identity card or some form of identity to identify us, but is that really us? But why is it important to understand the dynamics of that identity? Well, let's look at it this way. Consider navigating life as a play where you can alter your character. And our sense of self is our script, which is directing our actions and our interactions. So by examining how our identities evolve, we can better understand ourselves and others, which leads to more meaningful relationships and a more authentic life. And again, authenticity in your life, it comes down to your own subjectivity in how you want to present your life, who you want to be. So to begin with our discussion on identity, I'm going to lay down some groundwork and define identity, but also define roles and labels so that we better understand the difference and nuances between them. Because identity, roles, and labels are often used interchangeably, but are not exactly the same. And I think it's important to understand this because, again, this is all a construct of our thinking, of our behavior, of our past experiences, and all the influences in our life. We can change that and alter any of these at any point, should we choose to. Some of us choose not to at all, which is perfectly fine with me. So identity refers to this it's a broad encompassing concept of who a person is, of who you are. So the identity, look at it as an umbrella term for encompassing who you are as a person. And then it includes, an individual's self-conception and self-perception. And it's basically comprised of personal characteristics, your beliefs, values, and emotional responses. I mean, because you can be labeled a crybaby, and if you consistently cry or are emotional, your identity or that behavior shapes your identity. And identity is shaped by both internal factors like your personal experiences, like I said, and psychological makeup, and also external influences such as your social interactions and cultural background. Because cultures have their own identity, their own behavior. You ever think about that? How a culture, there's nothing mandating how a culture should be other than the people in that culture who have grown up with their set of beliefs. That can be broken at any time, but they seem to be mesmerized by that and kind of controlled by that whole ideology of how to behave and how to think and believe and what they should and should not do, and which creates their identity. And then that comes out of you, the individual, who comes out of that culture still retaining some of that identity. So I'll give you an example. If you're from India, for example, and you are rooted in that culture, but yet you come to the United States or you go into Europe somewhere where the culture is different, you can do one or two things. You can assimilate, or you can retain your cultural identity as an Indian and just survive in a different cultural land. A lot of people try to come and assimilate into the host country's culture, taking on a whole new identity or creating a new hybrid identity between their culture and the new culture. And key aspects of identity is that it's fluid and multifaceted. Fluid, what I mean by fluid is that it it's constantly changing, and it's a dynamic interaction of personal history, your ongoing experiences, and in social contexts. It encompasses various elements, including gender identity, which is a hot topic nowadays, cultural identity, which I mentioned, and personal achievement, and a lot more than that. And just real quickly, folks, gender identity is not the same thing as sexual orientation or biological sex, what you're born with, the sex organs you're born with. Gender identity is how you identify in what gender. We're not going to get too deep into this here, but we'll touch on a little bit of gender identity. And then we have labels. I am not a fan of labels because I think what happens is when you label somebody, most weak-minded people will live to that label. They'll use that as an excuse or as a source of empowerment, depending on their perspective. As an example, if you label a child slow or weak, that child will grow up thinking he's slow or weak. And the opposite is true. You could name a slow or weak child intelligent, and they'll grow up thinking they're intelligent. So labels are very powerful terms and categories applied to, individuals or groups based on specific characteristics. And going back to, if you perceive someone as slow or weak or not as intelligent, and you identify that characteristic in them, you might label them that way, which may or may not be true. And labels can also be self-assigned, but are often assigned by others. So you can label yourself, I'm a vegan. I'm a carnivore. I like meat. I like those. Those are my fun labels. I'm a vegan. No, you're not. You're a human. You just don't like to eat meat, okay? Let's call it what it is. And I think labels are also, it's not even I think, labels are also used to simplify complex identities into basically easy to understand terms. And we just talked about, like I'm a vegan, or you can say I'm a conservative, I'm an introvert, I'm an athlete, I'm diabetic. These are all labels, folks. These are labels that you give yourself or someone else gives you. And you might have been labeled something where you didn't even think you met that label. Like someone might have said, "Oh, you're ultra conservative." You're like, "No, I'm not. I'm actually kind of middle of the road." Or you're a vegan, and like, not really. I mean, I do eat a lot of vegetables, but, I do eat meat too. So people may misassign a label, and that can be dangerous because they can stick to that and form their own belief systems all around the label they gave you, which is not even true. And I think the danger of labels, which is a key aspect, is that it reduces your full identity to one or a few dimensions. It doesn't take into account your entire identity of who you are. It focuses on probably the most visible or prominent traits that you exhibit. It doesn't do a deep dive. It's like a heuristic, a shortcut to identifying someone. We just give them a label. So on the one hand, labels can help facilitate social understanding and communication, because they're simplified, but they can also be very limiting and misleading or even stigmatizing if they create that simplistic view of a person, Like I said, if someone labels you ignorant, for example, and you're not ignorant, but they label that because you might have misquoted something, or they just don't like you, and they might give you that label. And that can become a problem because if they're an influencer within a group, they can convince others that you are that label and you're not. And finally, folks, roles. So we've had identity, labels, and roles, which refer to expected behaviors, expected responsibilities and norms associated with very specific social positions or status. And you can have multiple roles. If you have multiple identities, then I'm a little concerned. But, you can have multiple roles. For example, like mother, teacher, daughter, son, dad, construction worker, airline pilot, leader, student. All these are all roles. You play multiple roles. You might play a role as a office worker during the day, come home, and you play the role as a husband or wife at night, a mom. You might be a caregiver. You might have a second job and be a police officer at night, and an office worker during the day. I don't know if they do that, but I'm just saying that you can have those multiple roles. And each role is nicely packaged and it comes with very specific expectations from society about how you should behave in these roles. So take, for example, if I say a police officer, what are some thoughts that come to mind right now about how a police officer should behave? Then I say a sailor, a cargo ship, deckhand. How should they behave? Or if I say a restaurant chef or a military leader, these all have these preconceived ideas in your mind, these pictures of how these roles, of how people should behave, because they're pre-programmed into your thinking. And then sometimes when someone in a certain role, like a teacher, for example, we think teachers should be respected or respectful of students. They should be educated and smart, and they should hold at least a higher moral ground. Not that they always do, but let's say one of them goes astray and does something completely opposite out of character for that role. What happens? Then everyone just starts going, "Oh my God, this teacher did this." They start talking about it because it's such a departure from that prepackaged role expectations. And we see that in churches. We see that with Catholic churches and some of the priests that have basically been found guilty of I would say sexual abuse of children. And that's not a good thing. You would expect that a man of the cloth would be respected and hold a higher moral ground, but when that changes, it changes your whole perspective of religion, of the priesthood. And so it really damages the concept of that role. So now the stigma, which might be just a few that have done that, but the entire priesthood gets punished, has this negative stigma. Okay, so now that we understand generally what roles play, labels, and then an overview of identity, let's get into the crux of identity and understanding identity in, our modern world. And it is quite a modern world. Oh boy, I crack myself up sometimes. I don't even know why I crack myself up. Maybe it's all the little people in my head talking to me. So taking a look at identity in our modern context, it's a very complex idea, very multifaceted construct that goes beyond, as we said earlier, traditional labels of race, gender, and nationality, and anything else. It encompasses various roles that we play, and we talked about the roles parent, worker, friend, doctor, whatever the profession you are. And it's influenced by personal choices, our social interactions, and societal expectations. And let's not forget today's digital age. Virtual identities on social media and online platforms also play a crucial role in shaping our self-concept. I mean, how many of you have created a whole different identity and persona for yourself online that is a departure from what you are in reality, I should say physical reality? And I'm sure quite a few people have done so. They pretend to be somebody different. And I shouldn't say pretend, because pretend is assuming that identity and who you are is a locked-in concept. It's set in stone, and it's not. You can be who you want to be, online, offline. But people take on a whole different identity when they're online. And this is probably a direct result of the fact that identity is dynamic. It allows for changes, and growth over time. And you may not like how you live your life, in a physical world. So therefore you get into the social digital realm, and you want to be somebody different. You want to act different. You want to present yourself in a very different light. You want to be looked at maybe a little differently than what other roles that people have assigned you in the physical world. Which also, identity being dynamic, is influenced by new experiences and insights. And that takes into account this whole new digital realm, which we're all a part of, unless you live in the woods somewhere and you don't have any technology, which is, all the power to you. I envy you if you're that person. But then again, you wouldn't be listening to me because you wouldn't have the technology. So scratch that. And culture profoundly shapes our identity. And again, we talked about by setting norms, values, and the behaviors that are adopted from an early age. You're influenced from an early age from your cultural background or your parents' cultural background. They bestow upon you their belief system. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't grow up and change that. A lot of kids do, especially a lot of immigrant kids who come to the United States or come to Europe, and they change their identity to adapt to the new society, the new culture. They want to fit in. They want to be part of that society. But culture still plays an important role in a person's identity because it basically dictates expectations around certain milestones in life. For example, your education, career, family. In the Hispanic culture, they do the quinceañera, the young girl coming up of age at 15. In Judaism, they have the bat mitzvah and the bar mitzvah for boys and girls. And basically, these rites of passage, cultural milestones, influences how that individual going through that deal with life events, basically. And it changes their behavior a little bit. Well, now I'm a man. Now I'm a woman. I've gone through this rite of passage. That is my new identity, so to speak. And, something we touched on briefly, globalization, this whole interconnectedness between countries and cultures, basically, even travel can create a hybrid identity. Remember, we briefly touched on the fact that if you come from a different country like India and you come to the U.S. or Europe or another country, even Australia, and you retain some of that cultural identity and you take on and assimilate to the new culture, you're creating this whole new hybrid, this whole new cultural hybrid identity, blending the elements from various cultures together. You might just be a traveler traveling the world and picking up parts of different cultures and then adapting that to your own culture, to your own identity in your own host country. So all of these have a profound influence on shaping your identity. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and the whole point of this podcast, this topic, is to understand that identity is not set in stone. It's dynamic, it's ever-changing, and it's influenced by everything around you. From childhood up until now, these are elements that you can change about your life should you want to change them. And I'm not advocating you should change anything, but I'm just trying to present to you an idea that identity is not fixed. So you don't have to, if you don't like the identity in which you have right now, you can acquire a new identity through new experiences. Try traveling, try creating an identity based on other cultures that you've visited or are familiar with, even through media. I love that media. It's both evil and good at the same time. And personal experiences also shape your identity. I mean, you could be working with an ethnic group of people that share their culture with you. And it's those personal experiences that help shape your identity. You might take on some of the stuff that they enjoy. For example, food. Maybe you've never been exposed to spicy food and you're enjoying food with people from India or Mexico or South America. And you start enjoying the spicy food, and that becomes part of who you are, a person who seeks out that spicy taste in food. I'm not sure that was a very good analogy, but I think you get the idea. And here's something that you're probably not completely aware of, but these social interactions in our life, they're mirrors. They're mirrors in which we see and refine our own identities. We look to others within our society and our culture and our group, and we check ourselves. Are we acting or behaving in this way? Should we make a modification to mirror what that person's behaving like? Do we revere them? Do we respect them? Do we admire them? We look at our peers. We look at broader social networks, individuals in our group, that we meet with on occasion or daily, even relatives. And it's these relationships and social roles that provide a context for the development of our identity and the continuous development of our identity. And we may just completely reject it. We may not like how any of them act and say, I want to be somebody different. And again, you have that choice. You see, it's not locked or set in stone. And another modern phenomenon for the impact of social interactions on identity is social networking sites. It's like Facebook, TikTok, and any other sort of platform that allows you to share and exchange ideas. They intensify the role of social interactions in the formation of your identity. They allow you to experiment with and manage multiple identities. Like we've talked about, you can be whoever you want to be online. You can have multiple accounts with multiple identities, see which one has the most likes, so to speak. And you're like, oh, I think I'm going to be that person today, or I'm going to just adapt that. And that doesn't mean it stays online. You can adapt that into your own personal life as well. And I want to reiterate that this isn't my opinion. This is information is based on solid research. Studies in psychology that highlight the identity formation, that highlight identity formation is an ongoing process. It's influenced by cognitive development and socialization. This is studies done by the social psychologist Erickson on the stages of identity development. Even sociological research emphasizes the role of societal structures and cultural contexts in shaping your identity, showing that identity adapts to fit social roles and expectations. Let me say that again. Showing that identity adapts to fit social roles and expectations. So you can simply say, change your social role, change your expectation, change your identity. And even neuroscientific findings suggest that areas of the brain involved in memory, reasoning, and emotional regulation play a very important role in the ongoing process of the formation of your identity and the reformation of identity as well. So there's a lot of science to back what I'm talking about. So again, the key takeaway from this part is that you can change your identity should you want to. It's not set in stone, and some people may want to. So you're not stuck in who you are. You don't have to give yourself a label and stay with that label. You could change your roles. You can have multiple roles, but just expand your horizons. Go out, meet new people, experience new experiences, connect with international people, find what makes you who you are, and adapt that to your life. Okay, folks, now I want to turn my attention to the fluidity of identity. And no, that's not the name of a bestseller. So identity, as we already discussed briefly, is very fluid. It's dynamic. It's constantly, I wouldn't say constantly changing, but it does change and changes frequently. But unlike static characteristics that you might possess, identity, as I said, is dynamic, and it's evolving part of human experience. And it changes in response to life's influences and the decisions that you make in your life. So, for example, if you're making career choices, that's going to have an impact on your identity. If you make religious choices, political choices, family choices, all of this has an impact on your identity. And it's definitely not fixed at birth, but does develop and transform through various stages of life, which is, again, influenced by your personal choices, social environments, and cultural exposures. If you feel like I'm repeating this, it's because I'm trying to drive the point home that, again, identity is not fixed. It's fluid. It changes over time and with experiences and with your own personal choices. So what does this say about you? It says that you have that capability to change your identity, to change who you want to be, rather than staying who you are. So if you're unhappy with yourself, it's only because you choose to be unhappy with yourself. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but the capability exists for you to make that change. Just be cognizant of the fact that you can make that change. I mean, there are psychological theories, as we talked about, Erik Erikson, who emphasize that the evolution of identity takes place through a series of stages, each characterized by specific challenges and growth opportunities in your life. So it comes down to this here. The next time you're going to make a career change, the next time you're going to make a change in your life, consider the implications that it has on your identity. You can pick, let's say you move to a completely new location. You can completely change that identity, become somebody different. And I'm not saying like change your look and everything, but just change who you are for the better and not necessarily the worst. Although some people do change their identity for that, make those adjustments. One of the big things that helps propel identity shift is a change in your career. There are people that take on a whole different career midlife, sometimes 2 or 3 careers that are in completely different industries. So they go through multiple identity changes throughout their entire life. And this affects how they see themselves and how they are perceived by others as well. And as an example, let's say you are a janitor at a hospital, and you're keeping it under wraps. So it's natural that people are not going to look up to a janitor, which is sad because to me, everybody's equal. And a janitor is as capable as a doctor in terms of, their existence, the being equal, being respected. However, the majority of people will look at a janitor and not have a lot of respect for them. But let's say you're this janitor and you're putting yourself through medical school, but nobody really knows this. And then let's say 4 or 8 years later, however long it takes to get through medical school, you come out a doctor. Now you're Dr. So-and-so instead of the janitor so-and-so. The perspective that people have about you changes drastically. Even the perspective you have about yourself. Because as a janitor, you're heavily influenced. Your identity is heavily influenced by how people treat you and talk to you and perceive you. It begins to wear on your psyche, and you begin to buy into this identity that I'm just a janitor picking up trash. But do a mind shift, become a doctor, or become anything else that is respected, and then watch how people perceive you and treat you, and watch how your identity shifts in that area. I mean, for example, you can also have let's say a former military officer transitions to a career in the arts. I mean, you're going from a combat soldier in theater to an artist. The shift not only alters his professional identity, but also affects his personal values and his lifestyle. What does he value now versus what he valued as a military officer? This whole shift in values changes when you shift careers and identity. So are you getting the whole big picture about identity, how identity is not a fixed characteristic? It's something that evolves over time. It's fluid. It can change. So I want people to understand, to get away from this notion that you're stuck in being who you are just because someone says you're A, B, C, D, and E. That's not true. That's what someone else says about you based on maybe how you perceive yourself or how you act or from a culture that you come from. You can change that by shifting your mind set and learning new customs, new skills, new experiences. And these career changes and these mind shift changes requires new skills and, again, requires new mindsets. And what they do is they lead to a reassessment of your personal strengths, weaknesses, and your overall self-concept. And so it's kind of like a transformation from, a butterfly, from a caterpillar to a butterfly. So you're becoming a butterfly. I'm not sure if you want to be a butterfly. Hey, butterflies are cool. I love butterflies. But you get my point, right? And then becoming a parent, I mean, that completely. I remember when I became a parent, I lived life almost, I wouldn't say reckless, but I was more risk-taking. I took risks a lot before I had a child. And when I had a child, I began to drive like a little old lady from Pasadena, in the slow lane. It's like I wanted to be very cautious, extra cautious, having a kid in the car. So it changed my whole identity on who I was, this risk taker who would ski, slopes that were steep, double black diamonds. It didn't really matter. I would take risks. I've flown off cliffs with quads and broke my collarbone. I've done all kinds of crazy things. But then when the kid came along, it's like, you know what? I better slow down. So there's a major identity shift. And the same thing happens with almost every parent. They go from living one way, being one way, having one set of values, to having a completely different set of values. They'll go from, I'm partying every night, to, I'm not going to party at all. Some people still party when they have kids. They don't care. But you get the idea. And we touched on this too. Significant personal experiences, such as like moving to a whole new country. I mean, if I moved away from the U.S. and into, maybe a Scandinavian country, I would have a complete identity shift. I would want to adapt and assimilate to their culture and become, one of the locals, so to speak, even though I'm not originally from, let's say, Finland or Iceland. I would want to adapt to their culture to kind of assimilate and blend in with them. I would retain some of my culture, but that move will have a significant change on your identity. And you'll have to adapt to their laws and also their cultures. So, I mean, it's almost like a forced, you can live in isolation, I guess, but that would be kind of boring. What's the point of moving to another country? If you pick a place you want to go live, even Canada, I would love to live in Canada. I don't think I think they're different than people from the United States, but, they have a different identity, and a different mindset. But nevertheless, moving to Canada would definitely shift my mind and my identity. I would want to do as the Canadians do, so to speak. So recognizing the fluid nature of identity can lead you to a greater self-acceptance and greater flexibility in your personal growth. Understanding that it's fluid, that it's not rigid, that you're able to make that change, and you can, if you want to, based on your all life experiences, culture, current environment, it will lead you to greater self-acceptance. And that's where we want to be. We want to accept ourselves. We want to be flexible in our personal growth. We want to be able to grow and shift our mindsets to become better people, not necessarily buy into this ideology that you're born with a certain identity and you're going to die with that identity. That's like putting you into a box. If you like to be in a box, by all means, stay in that box. Don't come out. But if you want to be outside of that box, be a free thinker, be fluid and dynamic as a human being, be the best that you can be, then embrace the fact that identity is fluid. It's constantly changing, and you can constantly make that change. And understanding that identity can change provides a framework for you for coping with life's uncertainties and challenges. So you go into a new job, you go into a new place to live, you're not locked into who you were. You are now able to change and adapt to that environment, and that's perfectly okay. And also embracing fluidity and identity allows you to adapt more readily to changing circumstances and to explore new aspects of yourself in a very healthy and in an open-minded manner versus having to struggle. There's a lot of people that struggle with identity change, with adapting to new environments, because I don't think they understand that identity is fluid. They can make that change, that they have to be stuck in their old ways, and that is not true. That is something that's taught to you. That is an unrealistic belief. It is 100% false. You have that power to make that identity change for yourself, to better yourself, become more open-minded, and to be more self-accepting of yourself. So far, we've been identifying ways that individuals, you, myself, can make a change in our identity by maybe moving to a new country, doing a career shift, career change, shifting our perspective, gaining new experiences, learning about other cultures, and a plethora of other reasons. However, society also plays a role in identity, in forming your identity too. And societal roles serves as frameworks that significantly influence our identity by setting these expectations for behavior, for responsibilities of these roles, and interactions. I mean, you have roles such as parent, professionals, doctors, teachers, students, and even community members. They come with very specific expectations. We talked about this early on. If you're a doctor or if you're a police officer, there's a certain set of expectations and norms that shape how people perceive themselves, these professionals, and how others perceive them. I mean, in adhering to or rebelling against these roles can define your self-concept and influence your personal decisions and life trajectories by doing so. For example, professional roles, they often dictate a substantial part of your identity, right? I mean, if you're a broker, stockbroker, if you're a cashier, it dictates a substantial part of your identity. It influences your self-esteem, your daily routines, and your social status. As much as I dislike social status, unfortunately, we can't get away from that. And professionals or career roles play a big, important impact or a part of your social status. Some societies, revere certain professions more than other societies might. For example, a doctor or teacher may integrate their professional responsibilities deeply into their personal identity, which affects how they interact even outside of their professional environment. They'll carry that over with them from their job to the outside world, so to speak. In changing your professional career, let's say you go from a doctor to a teacher, maybe become a professor at a university. That leads to a definitely a significant identity shift. As you take on this new role, you may align, or have conflict with your pre-existing personal values and self-perceptions. So you will go in from a doctor to a professor. I don't know what would be better. To me, they're both equal, as far as career paths are concerned. One works on people, they both work on people, right? Help people, one educationally, the other one, physically, medically. But maybe it changes your perception of which one is better. I don't know. That really comes down to the individual, right? I don't value either one more or less. I think they're both important. Gender roles, historically ingrained in societal expectations, play a crucial role in shaping identity from a young age. Boys do this, girls do that. But what have we seen over the last decade or 2 decades? We've seen gender identity emerge into a plethora of different forms of identity. We've got this whole pronoun thing going. It's them, they. I think that's kind of odd. It's like messing with the English language to begin with. But we have this whole personal pronoun, how you identify as a gender. And again, it's your free choice. You are free to choose whatever gender identity role you want to do. That's, to your heart's content. Hallelujah. I'm good with that. But don't get upset if somebody misidentifies you, because the majority of people on this planet fall prey to societal, cultural norms when it comes to gender identity, man and woman. Take a look at the Middle East. Take a look at Asian cultures. They believe women have one type of identity, whereas in the West, the identity of a woman is more open and somewhat equal to a man. And so what does all this mean? Societal expectations about gender roles, they influence our personal choices. They influence our personal choices in education, career, and even our hobbies, which impacts, yes, our self-esteem and our opportunities for personal growth. Go to the Middle East, go to Afghanistan, the Taliban. They don't believe that women should be educated. A lot of Islamic countries don't believe that women should be educated, although that's come a long way now, so I take that back. Not every one of them do. But there are some extreme Islamic beliefs that don't believe women should, have an education. And what about some Asian cultures where they believe the women, or even African cultures where they believe the woman is subservient to the man? Try that here in the United States. Watch you get belted with a frying pan if you tell that to a woman, an American woman. But again, that really comes down to how the society is set up and the expectations and the cultural expectations. In the Middle East or Africa, the woman from a child is going to say, well, I'm going to grow up, be married, I got to take care of the household, feed my husband, and, do all the household chores and child rearing. Whereas in the West, they're like, I'm not going to raise my child. I'm going to let someone else raise it. I'm going to have a career, and I'm going to be the boss of the house. Completely different. I know, because I have this argument with my wife all the time. Oh, boy. And if you challenge traditional gender roles, that can lead to a significant identity shift and definite pushback by society, which can have societal consequences as well. Even some Christian churches are very strict in the way they view gender roles between a man and a woman, and completely negate any other type of gender identity. So, again, it comes down to where you're from, your belief system, your experiences, and all that. I say you can be anything you want to be. Be whatever you want to be. Be whatever gender you want to be. It doesn't really matter. You're going to die anyway. We're all going to. That's a guarantee. So might as well just enjoy your life and be who you want to be, right? And there's a real negative downside to not just gender identity, but to just general identity based on your cultural upbringing. There's a general societal pressure to conform, because what happens if you don't conform to these certain identity roles? They can impact your personal identity formation and your mental health. Can you imagine women that are subservient, that don't want to be subservient? How that impacts their mental health, how that impacts their life? On the one hand, don't get me wrong, On the one hand, conforming to societal expectations can provide a sense of belonging, you know what I mean? And a sense of approval from your culture, if that's what you're looking for. But it can also suppress your individuality and your personal growth. And I think here in the West, we all push for individuality. We all want to be individuals. We want to be seen as somebody, unique next to the next person. We want to be our own person, not like a cookie cutter part of a identity that's, part of some society or culture that's all doing the same thing. And that's where the conflict really lies, when we start to go against what other cultural norms are. And I think that's a big problem between the West and the Middle East and the East, is that we revere women. I mean, we look at women as equal, and we allow them to be, in positions of power, whereas the Middle East and the Far East, Asia, they don't do that as much. And there's a theoretical and practical implication of identity fluidity. I mean, there's various psychological and sociological theories that provide frameworks for understanding how identities form, evolve, and influence our behavior. So whether you come from a culture that's one way, or you come from a like an Eastern culture, or if you come from a Western culture. Again, we're going to go back to Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development and James Marcia's identity status theory, which explain identity formation as a dynamic process influenced by personal crises and commitments. Again, they hypothesize that your own personal identity is a culmination of your personal crises, occurrences in your life, and the commitments that you make. And sociological insights push the ideology that social structures and cultural conditions shape and sometimes constrain individual identities. I mean, there's different perspectives and theories of identity. But the bottom line is, with identity, it is shaped and reshaped through ongoing, constant social interactions and the negotiation of roles in various contexts. When I say the negotiation of roles, I'm talking about how we deal with different roles in society. And the dynamics of identity negotiation are very important for understanding personal adaptations in environments like, the workplace, educational institutions, and social groups. I mean, it's really important. These, I would say, are breeding grounds or training grounds for our identity development in most people. And I would say in almost everybody. And even social media, modern technology, has transformed how identities are formed, and how they're presented, and how they're perceived. I mean, here you have social media. You can have curated personas which impact your self-perception and social interactions. That's pretty powerful if you could be one person, as we discussed earlier, in the physical world and come to the digital world and completely fabricate a different identity. But here's the kicker with that. The digital age actually introduced challenges that are related to privacy, authenticity, and the psychological impact of online interactions on identity, meaning that we have a whole host of issues when dealing with social media and identity and the authenticity of people. Look at the catfishers, the people out there trying to catfish the lonely hearts, the people that are looking for love, or the scammers, or the bullies. All of these have come into play and helped shape identity. And this is why it's really important to understand that identity is fluid and you can make that change. You don't have to fall prey to some sort of societal norm or cultural norms. You can generate your own path. You can create your own healthy sense of self, your own healthy identity. And I believe by truly understanding identity fluidity, you can enhance your personal life. You can enhance organizational dynamics, leadership approaches, and personal development if you understand the fluidity of identity. It can help improve so much in life. It can help improve the work environment. It can help improve the home life environment, the academic environment, by just understanding identity fluidity. Because what it really comes down to is that leaders who appreciate and accommodate the fluid nature of employee identities can foster inclusivity, adaptability, and resilience. And embracing philosophical and psychological insights into identity can empower individuals to navigate life's changes more effectively, which is very important. And it promotes a healthier and more authentic life. And I think the key here to getting along with people, to really being liked, to being a leader, to being accepted, is to be authentic. Be true to yourself. Okay, folks, this brings us to the end of our show. I encourage you to reflect on your own identity. Take a look at it. Take a self-examination of who you are and how you portray yourself and how you're perceived, at work, at home, in your community. Consider the various roles you inhabit and how they have shaped your sense of self. And think about the times your identity has shifted and what triggered those changes. If you're interested in a deeper dive into identity, I recommend reading Erik Erikson's work on identity development, exploring Pierre Bourdieu's theories of social practice, and engaging with the existential writings of Jean-Paul Sartre. These guys have all talked about identity. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart if you've stuck with me this far. I really appreciate you. And I'm really hoping that you're gaining some insights from these podcasts that can help you become a better person, a better thinker, and realize that life has no scripts. I'm Alan Stafford. Until next time, this is Life Unscripted.